Welcome to Influential Women of Washington State. I'm Katie Hall. In this series, we'll explore empowerment by speaking with women in positions of influence and leadership. You'll meet impactful women who have overcome personal and professional hurdles to fulfill their goals and dreams. In this introduction to our series, we'll hear some guest comments on the importance of women in leadership. I want to start off talking about women and women in leadership positions, and why is that so important for women to be in leadership positions across many roles. Whoever wants to start can kick us off.
Diversity. I think women bring a different perspective sometimes, and sometimes they bring a different energy. They tend to, they can look at things in a different way, maybe things that have been status quo forever, and they can bring and they have the courage to change some of the things that need to be changed.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's funny that we're even having this conversation about why it's important for women to be in leadership. We're 50% of the population.
Oh, yeah.
It's the fact that we have to even consider why it is important is a little, it says we're not where we need to be.
Mm.
When you don't have people, speaking from a political perspective, when you don't have people at the table who have different experiences, no matter how hard the well-intentioned people who are at the table try, they're not going to know. They're not going to know the needs of the people they're representing. They're not going to have that day-to-day familiarity with the issues. And so they won't be able to represent the way we really need to. And one thing I will say, though, is that we're seeing that change in politics so fast. For the first 5 years, I would go around and talk to people. I'd say, please run for office. I would encourage women to run for office, and they'd all nod, and I'd never see anybody. This year, there's so many women running for office locally, nationally. It's amazing.
Yes.
And it's important to pull this into context and really honor a history as well. There are shoulders. There are people who've been encouraging this for so long. There are people who've really made things possible. I feel like it's a threshold time, and it's really important.
Yeah.
And my clinic is named after a woman. The clinic next to me is named after a woman. Many of the institutions in the communities I work in are led, carried, held up, supported, and historically built by women.
The women that I know who are presidents, and in fact, I would say my best mentors in presidency, the people I call, are actually women presidents who I've known. As I talk to them, they've created their own network of folks. And then when you look, Washington State, maybe not characteristic of the whole country, but when you look at where I came from, Illinois and Washington State, you're starting to see a transition to women leading the institutions. I know at the college I came from, probably 70% or more, I think over the majority of the administrative cabinet are women. And so I think there's a change going on in education. It's easier for us to make that change, perhaps, than when you get into the whole corporate issues, although corporations are changing also.
I think whenever you have people who are not historically represented in positions of power, the experiences and the voice that you bring always changes the dialogue. So if I wasn't a woman of color, let's say I identified in other ways. Let's say I was a man of color. My voice there would lend its leadership perspective from the experiences that I bring. And you and I and many of the people who we interact with understand that who we are as people, who you see me as, you will have a reaction to that. That's just who we are as people, right? We walk around, we make assumptions and decisions about everybody that we see and interact with. So when I'm sitting on that board and I talk about where I've been, or my decisions and my thoughts are informed by my own experiences, it's going to be very different than a former tech executive who's retired and has 40 years of experience as a white male of privilege in society. It has to be different because we're treated differently. So I really value voices that are not traditionally represented in the narratives that we see. So when we look at our magazines, when we look at television, radio, all those places, even this college, when we look at posters, when we look at each other, when we see who is represented there, our brains assume that's normal. That's who has the right to be here. And so when I sit in those board meetings and when I look out over the mission of Bellevue College and I look out at the students, I think what a privilege it is and what a responsibility I have to them to show them you should expect to have your voice heard.
We have so much to give, and I would say that while I want more women to have positional power, because decision-making matters, who's making decisions matters, and making decisions that benefit all of us, because we bring our full selves, we bring our heart, we bring our life experience, we bring who we are to the table, is really important. But it's also important that women are showing how we lead and that we're bringing women's leadership characteristics to the table, that we're listening, that we're really authentic, that we're collaborative, that we are driving change and modeling how else leadership can look. Because really what I would love to see is that as more of us hold positions of power, we start to just see that what we think of as a woman and what we think of as a leader is like more in the same bubble, right? And that those two things can go together. They're not separate. And that we all can authentically lead for who we are. And I think that is so important. We've all talked about, younger women and girls looking at us and seeing what's possible. So it's so critical that that's happening on a campus every single day. That we are looking like who we are representing and that we're doing that really powerfully.
I just wanted to contribute. It's interesting to me. Higher education's really changing now. It's a sea change. We're all wondering where the men are. If you look at the graduates, about 60% of the people earning bachelor's degree are women. And yet if you look at the leadership of institutions, about 25% of presidents in the United States in colleges and universities are women. So there's a great disparity between the numbers of people that are in the workforce and the ability to navigate to leadership positions. So programs that you're doing, I think, are amazing, and engaging women to help other women, and to realize what power we have when we work together and support each other. I mean, that change can happen. I know a change has happened in my life. I was the first woman dean of students in the state, and all the men were either superintendents or old football coaches, and so I was certainly the odd person out. But those individuals helped me, and they were an important part of my education. So we're seeing change, and it's amazing to me. I mean, I always think of education kind of being on the forefront, and when you look at the disparity still in our numbers, and then you go into people of color, and you're talking about 7%. So the funnel still exists even in higher education, and there's a lot of work for all of us to continue to do.
I think that's an important data point, and then if we expand to looking at CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, right? So to Jean's point, where women are degree holders at same rate or higher rates than men, they're in the workforce, same or higher depending on industry, and then when we look at the C-suite, out of the Fortune 500, it's 32 are led by women, and 2 women of color. And this is the highest it's ever been since they've been tracking this data. This is 2017 data. So out of 500 companies, 32 are led by women, 2 women of color, no black women. Then that tells you something else is happening, right? We know not every woman wants to be a CEO of a company, but we know it's more than 32. If we look at Fortune 500, we know it's more than 25% in higher ed. I don't know what the metric is in nonprofit, but so that's where the institutional patriarchy, sexism, racism, the intersectionality of oppression comes in, because it's not because of lack of effort. Right.
As you've seen so far, women face many degrees of adversity on their way to leadership positions. As we further examine empowerment, we'll hear the encouragement of those who have crossed barriers and lived their dreams out loud. And so what would you say to that young workforce as far as like the biggest area of adversity you have experienced in your life and how you overcame it?
I think the most important thing that young girls and women need to really embrace and own is that their life is important and that their dream is achievable. So many young people are simply afraid to pursue that dream, the lack of confidence. And what I continue to say, young lawyers, young women, girls, is believe in yourself. Believe that your voice is legitimate. Believe that your dream is achievable, and don't let anything get in the way, no matter what. And I have to admit that for me, I suppose I was arrogant enough as a kid, coming from a disadvantaged background in Chicago, is to have some sense of belief in myself, to be sassy enough to push back, to not shut up when you're supposed to, and just hear your own voice and claim it and own it and say that you have a place in this world.
There was a time where I nearly dropped out of high school. It was, my parents who really put their foot down, even though they weren't together at the time, each independently, to say no, that you're not going to do that. I was just feeling at the time that school didn't have a lot of purpose for me, and I was bored, frankly, and just wanted to get out on my own and work and so forth. I did end up graduating from high school. I actually completed early so I could graduate at semester, so I could leave high school. I did come back and walk with my class. And then I just worked for a while, and I was working at Pizza Hut after high school. But it was okay. I don't really have a plan, and I don't want to work at Pizza Hut for the rest of my life. And I remember distinctly, it was one of my friends who worked at Pizza Hut. I was a little intimidated at the thought of going to the community college at the time there, who was going there, and she said, I will take you there, I will help you, get registered and so forth, and she did. And so I've always had, people, friends, or family members in my life who have, at a critical time, helped push me in the right direction.
First, as a woman of color who's a vice president, I would say to you that challenges that I face even daily are just making sure that people understand that when I say something, I mean what I say. It's so easy for women of color to be marginalized within settings. It's easy for, I think classism to kind of come into things. And so every day I just have to somehow make sure people understand, the rules of the game. So that makes me have to balance being even-tempered, but also being very specific and being purposeful. That's one piece. And I have no problem with it because the women from whom I've been descended have given me everything I need to handle that in a way with grace. Everything that I have to understand about higher ed far surpasses my role at the college, because I have to be an advocate as a vice president for everything that needs to be right about what we need to do for our students. And so I see that role probably as my greatest blessing, is that I have an opportunity to be a voice, to bring my heart every day to work, and to understand that the students know that it is all about them at the end of the day. It's not about me, it's not about my title, it's not about my degrees. It's about bringing my heart to work for them.
As women bring their whole hearts to the workplace, many times a seat at the decision-making table isn't there for them, or they're just not being heard. Here are some tools for women to consider to add to their tool belt. I heard this a lot of women, I want a seat at the table. And I'm sure you have heard that before. You talk about seat at the table. And so I want to know, what do you think when you hear the terminology of, maybe you don't need a seat at the table. Instead, maybe you need to create your own table? Or do you think that we need both? What are your thoughts as women?
Yeah, I think we need both. I think we can't look to the same solutions of the past to think that we're going to come up with the solutions of the future. I mean, there's that saying, what's the definition of crazy, right? Like doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Yeah. And I think we're in a place right now where lots of transformation is happening. Transformation doesn't happen unless you start to try different things. I think it's finding a seat at the tables that exist. That might just mean furniture change, right? We just need to get a bigger table, right? And add more seats to the table. And it's also, where have tables not existed for women, for people of color, for individuals from the LGBT community, for individuals who have disabilities. You know, if the table doesn't exist, then let's create it. And I think also, how do you then also bring those tables together, the existing ones and the new ones? Because I think that's where the bridge building needs to happen, so that the power and the privilege that exists in the existing tables can be transferred and shared with the new tables that are being developed.
The more opinions and thoughts and experiences we bring to the discussion and the conversation about whatever it is, the better off we are. Because we don't want to miss something because we were siloed, right? So, and then we also have to look around when we're having these discussions about, particularly in policing, who's not here, whose voice isn't being heard, and then let's be deliberate, intentional about getting those voices heard as well. Because I really absolutely believe that the more people that we can engage with and connect with, the more thoughts and more experiences, we're going to make better decisions.
Just getting invited to the table is just not enough. Because so what, you're at the table, but people may just ignore you. They really just, but they're going to check the box and say, oh, but we invited you. You were sitting right, you were in that photo op. But you didn't listen to me, you weren't interested in what I had to say, and so a seat at the table is not sufficient. And creating your own table, making your own table from scratch, has a lot of positives, but you get left out of those boardroom conversations and you get left behind.
There's an old saying, sometimes if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And I think that whatever the conversation is, just being in the room and being a part of the discussion and being able to put your opinions forward makes whatever that ultimate decision, whatever it turns out to be, much more impactful, much more fruitful, because your opinion is being weighed in. And I do believe that people want to hear what you have to say. You just need to make sure that your voice is heard.
I think the voice of a woman always needs to be heard. Especially in medicine, especially in pediatrics, because I think we have more of a nurturing attitude and more empathy. Without the voice of a woman in healthcare and medicine in general, to find that nice work-life balance, to understand what our family's going through, what's the impact of diet, how do you go shopping as a mom, all of these aspects, I think it's very important to have the voice of the woman at the table.
When you get a seat at the table, you constantly have to keep an eye out as to how you can help others to get a seat at the table that should be there, but don't really have a way to be there. And then eventually, you just create your own table.
Yeah, I like that.
We have to be willing to step in and be at that sort of traditional table, but at the same time, our own table gives us a chance to talk to each other and support each other. We've got a female electeds group in King County, and we meet, every couple of months, and it's just to sit down and talk about some of the challenges, because they're new roles for a lot of women in especially in government, right? It's not, we're seeing this shift, and so I think that it's got to be a combination. I think we step in and we assert ourselves at this table, but we work together and figure out how to do this at that table.
Thanks for joining us in our exploration of empowerment. We hope you're encouraged and inspired by this short introduction into our TV series, Influential Women of Washington State. Please join us for future episodes and hear more in-depth discussions with these extraordinary women. Until next time, I'm Katie Hall.